Hey everyone! Tonight, we're going back far deeper than most ever dare to the dust, shadows, and secrets of ancient Babylon. A city of gods, laws, omens, and things that still whisper beneath its ruins. Imagine waking not to the sound of birds, but to the low murmur of temple chants drifting across the Euphrates. The sun is still low, casting a golden shimmer over the baked bricks of the ziggurats, towering like sacred mountains. Dust clings to the hem of your robe as you step into the narrow street. Every breath tastes of heat and clay, but you are not just anyone. You are a subject of Babylon, cradle of civilization, and home to laws older than empires. But Babylon does not watch you idly. Here, the gods are not distant. They walk the streets through the eyes of priests and kings. Every gesture, every slip of the tongue, every market deal you make may trigger unseen consequences. It is a city, ruled not only by kings, but by omens. Not every smile is honest. Not every punishment is just. And not every man who leaves his home in the morning sees the sunset. You will not last here, because this is a world where justice is brutal, superstition is law, and your fate may already be sealed by a dream you don't remember. There are no second chances in Babylon, not for women, not for slaves, not for priests who misread the stars, and certainly not for you. So come closer. The clay tablets are still warm with curses. The gods are listening, and the city, this living maze of blood, dust, and divine law, is ready to judge you. The moment your sandal hits the clay brick street, you're already being watched by scribes, by priests, by neighbors, but most of all, by the gods. And in Babylon, to be watched is not a comfort. It is a quiet terror, because every gesture, every deal, every careless word whispered under your breath can be measured against something that weighs more than any man alive, the law. You may have heard of it, the Code of Hammurabi, but it is not a book to be read. It is a monument, a towering slab of polished black diorite, rising over 7 feet high, etched from top to bottom with commands from the king who said he ruled by the will of the gods. The stele stands in the heart of the city like a dark pillar of fireless judgment, surrounded by incense smoke and the murmurs of those who dare read its lines. At its top, the king is carved in eternal stone, receiving divine instruction from the sun god Shamash himself. Below that sacred image, nearly 4,000 lines of cuneiform laws, as sharp as razors and as permanent as death. Imagine now that you are a modest grain merchant. Your wife and children depend on what little you can gather. A shipment comes in slightly underweight. Maybe the heat spoiled part of the load. Maybe the scales were tilted just a little. Not enough to matter, you think. Not enough to cause harm. But harm is not the point in Babylon. Order is the point. And a man who tampers with the scales is not a poor soul in hard times. He is a threat to divine balance. And so the code reads with chilling clarity. Asterisk, if a merchant shortchanges a customer, he shall be drowned in the river. Asterisk, not jailed, not fined, drowned, tied and tossed into the Euphrates, to be judged not by man, but by the water, which is sacred. And final, and if you resist, if you try to bribe the guard escorting you to your death, the penalty is swifter. If a man offers a bribe and it is discovered, his hand shall be cut off. A single transaction, a single moment, a single grain of dishonesty. That's all it takes. Now picture a builder, skilled and proud, constructing a home for a noble family. He finishes the job. The house gleams under the Babylonian sun, its brickwork perfect, its roof sealed with bitumen. But weeks later, it collapses in the night, killing the owner's son in his sleep. A tragedy, an accident. But accidents are not permitted here. The code reads, asterisk, if a builder constructs a house and it collapses and kills the owner's son, The builder's own son shall be put to death, not fined, not imprisoned, his son. Because in Babylon, justice is measured not just by deeds, but by mirrors. What is taken must be repaid with equal blood. Even the womb is not spared. If a man strikes a pregnant woman and she loses her child, he pays a heavy fine. But if she dies, his daughter must be executed. The law does not ask whether. The act was deliberate. It does not weigh intention. It demands symmetry. Life for life, limb for limb, status for status. And all of it carved in stone. Justice in Babylon is not a negotiation. It is a ritual, a sacred balancing act that even the king is sworn to uphold. For he, too, is bound by the code. And yet, make no mistake, class bends the law like hot bronze. If you knock out the tooth of a noble, your tooth is torn from your jaw. But if you do the same to a slave, you pay silver. Because Babylon's laws are not blind, they are hierarchical. Your status determines your suffering. And what of women? Their lives are lived on the blade of a law they had no voice in writing. If a wife is accused, not proven of being unfaithful, she may be subjected to the trial by ordeal. She is bound and thrown into the river. If she drowns, she was guilty. If she survives, the gods have saved her. But the water is rarely merciful. And even if it is, her name is never truly cleansed. Because in Babylon, the stain of accusation is eternal. Doctors, too, face the blade of expectation. If a physician performs surgery on a nobleman and the patient dies, the physician's hands are cut off. Think about that. The very tools that performed the healing are severed, not for malpractice, but for divine retribution. Yet again, class is everything. The same death dealt to a slave results not in amputation, but a fine. The gods, it seems, valued noble blood more dearly than common breath. The law stretches into the temples, wrapping around the throats of the priesthood like a silken noose. Priests who perform rituals incorrectly risk exile, beating, or worse. Misread an omen? Misplace a sacrifice? Lead a festival one day too early? The gods are easily offended, and punishment is swift. Because if a priest enjay the heavens, it is not just he who suffers. It is the entire city. Crops wither. Rivers flood. Enemies invade. One man's failure becomes 10,000's burden. And through all of this, through broken bodies, drowned innocents, shattered families, there is no revolt. No riots, no cries for reform. Because to break the law was not just to offend the king, it was to disrupt the mat, the sacred. Balance, the cosmic harmony. Hammurabi didn't invent the law. He claimed he received it from the divine. It was not man-made. It was heaven-sent. So as you walk through the shadowed alleys of Babylon, passing the smoky temples, the market cries, and the ever-watchful eyes of scribes, you realize something chilling. Here, the law is not your shield. It is your cage. It is not meant to protect you. It is meant to contain you. And one wrong word, one misjudged glance, one cracked brick, and you'll feel it snap shut like a bear trap around your life, and you haven't even seen the omens yet. Long before the first rooster crows over the city walls of Babylon, someone has already dreamt your future. And in this city, dreams are not harmless flickers of the sleeping mind. They are instructions from the beyond. You wake in a cold sweat, having seen a snake slither under your bed in your sleep. You think nothing of it. You bathe. You dress. You step out into the day. But the scribe, who reads omens from the temple archives, might tell you that dream means you will be betrayed. A serpent in a dream is never just a serpent. It is a message, coded in shadow, delivered by the gods, and it must be obeyed. In Babylon, dreams are facts, and they can kill you. You live in a city that hums with invisible warnings. A bird flying east at the wrong hour is enough to cancel a royal meeting. A sheep born with a second liver can change the outcome of a war. A sneeze before sunrise might delay a marriage. The high priests of Enuma Anu Enlil, the ancient collection of thousands of omens inscribed on clay tablets, record every twitch of nature, every hiccup of the sky, with fanatical precision. For them, the world is a divine manuscript, written not in words, but in signs. Eclipses, cloud shapes, animal entrails, even the birthmarks on a baby's skin. These omens are not interpreted lightly. They are divine communications, as clear, to the trained as ink on parchment, and ignoring them invites catastrophe. Now imagine this. You are summoned to appear before the local governor on a land dispute. But on your way there, you pass a one-eyed beggar in the street. You glance down, and you realize his left foot is missing. You freeze, because that exact configuration of man, with one eye and a missing left foot, was recorded on a tablet you overheard a priest reading weeks ago. You didn't understand it then. You understand it now. It means doom for someone, maybe for you. You turn and walk the long way around, hoping to cheat the omen by changing your route. But the priests will tell you, you can't outrun what the gods have already whispered. Babylon scholars, its seers, its haruspices, liver readers all, believe that the divine world is always speaking, and the only difference between safety and doom is whether you're listening. If your slave drops a jug of oil before a feast, it's not just clumsiness, it's a sign the evening will end in disaster. If your wife dreams of falling into a pit, the priests might advise you not to travel the next day. If you dream of a storm coming into your home, it could mean that your household will be torn apart by scandal or worse, plagued out in times of uncertainty. The king himself would retreat into isolation, consulting rows upon rows of clay tablets filled with previous omens. He would order sheep sacrificed, their livers studied with a cold-eyed precision. Each curve, each bump, each wrinkle of the organ was matched against ancient records. If the liver's foot was broken or swollen, bad fortune. If its glory lobe was small, betrayal from within. Every part had meaning. Nothing was random. Every wrinkle in flesh reflected a wrinkle in fate. No decision of consequence was made without these rites. Even battles were postponed if the omens weren't favorable. A king could be prepared, his armies trained, his enemy weak, but if a raven circled counterclockwise above the gate, the campaign would be delayed, sometimes indefinitely. Kings might abdicate, marriages might be undone, children might be abandoned at the city's edge, all because of what the heavens seemed to be saying. But what about you? You're no king, no priest. You have no access to the omens written in the temple archives, and yet your life is no less ruled by them. If your neighbor dreams of you stealing his bread, he may denounce you to the scribes. If a bad omen falls upon your house, it may be assumed that you have offended the gods, and someone must be punished. Perhaps your ox will be confiscated. Perhaps your daughter taken to serve in the temple to cleanse your guilt. Perhaps, if the omen is severe enough, your entire family will be exiled beyond the walls. You can live flawlessly. You can honor the gods, obey the law, and treat your neighbors kindly. But none of it will matter if the stars whisper your name in the wrong way. In Babylon, your fate is not built on your actions. It is seen. And once it is seen, it is sealed. And the most terrifying truth? Sometimes the omen doesn't even have to be real. A powerful rival, a jealous priest, a neighbor seeking revenge, any one of them could claim they had a vision, that the gods had spoken, that your death would prevent a greater catastrophe. And once the tablet is written and read aloud in the temple court, there is no appeal. The people will nod. The priests will close their eyes. The guards will come, because in Babylon, it doesn't matter whether you deserve it, only whether it was foretold. In Babylon, temples were not places you visited, they were powers you lived under. Colossal ziggurats rose above the skyline, like stairways to the heavens, each layered level painted in rich lapis blue, red ochre, and gold. These were not quiet houses of prayer. They were the beating hearts of the city, the lungs that pulled in incense and breathed out divine authority. You could live your entire life without entering the palace or speaking to a noble, but you could not go a single day without touching, fearing, or owing something to the temple. To understand Babylon, you must forget everything you know about. The boundary between sacred and secular. Here, there is no such line. The temple did not just belong to the gods. It owned property, wrote contracts, enforced laws, and raised armies. It owned people. It owned you. Perhaps you are a child, born in a poor household. Your parents cannot afford the tax levied during the month of Tammuz. They bring you, tiny and wide-eyed, to the temple of Ishtar, goddess of love and war, and offer you as a gift. But you are not offered to the goddess in spirit alone. You are placed into temple servitude, your life exchanged for your family's. Survival. You are clothed in ceremonial linen, forbidden to marry, and trained in rituals from dawn until the stars return. You are now a Nedru, a temple woman. Sacred, yes. Respected, perhaps. But also bound. Your name may still be yours, but your future no longer is. For others, service to the temple is inherited like land. If your father was a temple gardener, you will be too. If your mother poured water over the statue of Marduk each morning, that duty now belongs to you. The temple owns not just labor but time. It consumes generations. But it wasn't just commoners who were caught in the temple's grip. Even kings were servants of the gods. In fact, Babylon's greatest monarchs publicly humbled themselves before the high priests. Each new year, during the Akitu festival, the king was stripped of his royal insignia, slapped across the face by the high priest, and made to kneel before the great statue of Marduk. The message was clear. Asterisk, even the crown bows to the temple asterisk. If the king shed tears, it was a good omen. If not, the city held its breath. Inside the temple walls, ritual was everything. Priests did not simply pray, they performed divine maintenance. Each morning, the statues of the gods were bathed in purified water, anointed with scented oils, clothed in embroidered robes, and served a table of roasted meats and cakes. The food would sit for hours uneaten, while chants filled the air and bells rang out in rhythm with burning cedarwood. The gods did not need the food, but if it was not offered, plague might rise, famine might follow, and the skies might close. The ritual was not for beauty, it was for balance. The priesthood was vast and layered astrologers, exorcists, scribes, dream interpreters, each trained for years to understand the secrets of heaven and earth. Their knowledge was inscribed on thousands of clay tablets, locked in temple libraries. They could tell you the best day to sow barley, the correct formula to drive out a demon, and the proper shape to draw in ash to keep your child from illness. They were physicians, judges, astronomers, and they were feared, for they did not just interpret the gods. They stood between you and them. And then there were the temple, slaves the Zirku, whose lives were purchased with silver or blood. Captives from war, debtors, or condemned criminals could be sentenced to temple slavery. Unlike other slaves, they were considered sacred property, never to be sold or traded. Their backs bore tattoos of temple ownership, branding them not with shame, but with divine burden. They cleaned altars, dug wells, carved statues, and died anonymously in silence. No prayers were said for them. They were the prayer. You could not marry, trade, or bury your dead without involving the temple. Taxes were paid in grain, oil, or silver, often directly to the temple treasury. And if the temple decided to seize your land for sacred expenditure, there was no appeal. To resist was not a civic dispute. It was blasphemy. Your property could be cursed. Your name could be erased. Asterisk, and still, people worshipped. Because in the temple, there was also beauty. Festivals of golden chariots and flowered streets. Statues, so lifelike they seemed to breathe. Hymns that echoed across the Euphrates like the voice of the heavens. In the shadow of these great houses, a Babylonian felt small, but also held, surrounded by powers beyond understanding. The temple ruled you, but it also sustained you. Without it, the stars would fall, the river would dry, the gods would turn their faces away. So you burn the incense, you pour the wine, you kiss the earth, because here in Babylon, even your soul pays rent, and the temple always collect. You might think that Babylon's greatest walls were built to keep enemies out. But if you ask the slaves, those born into chains, and those captured by war, they might tell you the walls were built to keep them in. Slavery in Babylon was not just a condition, it was a fact of existence. It was inked into the contracts, carved into the law codes, and spoken in the everyday markets like the weight of grain or the price of fish. You could be born a free man one day and sold into servitude the next. All it took was a debt, a punishment, or the unlucky misfortune of standing on the losing side of a spear. Let's say your family owes silver to a lender, but the harvest fails. You fall behind. There are no warnings, no extensions. Your lender invokes Hammurabi's code. And just like that, you, or worse, your son is seized as a debt slave or wardom until the amount is repaid. It may be 3 years. It may be 30. It may be never. Because debt does not just shackle your wrists. It silences your name. In the public squares of Babylon, slaves are bought and sold like livestock. Contracts are drawn on clay tablets, sealed with cylindrical stamps and stored in temple vaults. They list your age, your origin, your physical marks, just enough to identify you if you try to run. Escape is not freedom. It is a crime. And if you are caught, the code is brutal. The runaway slave shall have his ears cut off, and you will be caught. Because Babylonian society is trained to notice you. There are watchmen at the gates, scribes at every market, informers in the alleyways. A runaway slave is not a man fleeing injustice. He is a crack in the system, a tear in the divine fabric of order. And nothing enrages Babylon like disorder. Now imagine, you are a woman from Elam, captured during a border skirmish, marched in chains through foreign lands to the city's edge. You do not speak the language. You do not know the gods. You are assigned to the house of a merchant whose wife scorns you. You grind barley until your fingers split. You scrub floors with water from the canal. If you cry out, there is no one to hear you. If you rebel, there is only the whip. Some slaves, particularly those born into it, manage to carve out routines. They tend the gardens. They serve in the kitchens. They raise children who are not their own. But even then, their humanity is a privilege, not a right. A slave has no testimony in court. If he is beaten without cause, no one answers. If she is raped by her master, the gods may judge, but the law does not. Yet some do rise. A slave might earn his freedom through loyal service. He might be granted liberty in the will of a dying master. He might even purchase his freedom if he's permitted to work in exchange for a portion of his own value. But that freedom is not equal. A former slave remains marked socially, spiritually, permanently. He is no longer bound, but neither is he truly free. He lives in the margins, never noble, never priest, never whole. And there are the temple slaves, bound not by coin or conquest, but by divine order. They wear special tattoos of ownership. Some are sacrificed in rituals. Others spend their entire lives preparing meals for statues or cleaning temple floors in silence. Their suffering is made sacred, which means it is invisible. Occasionally, you might hear whispers of resistance. A slave who poisoned her mistress. A servant who vanished under the moonlight and reached the desert. But these are rare, and they end in warnings. Heads displayed on spikes. Ears nailed to walls. Names erased from family records. For Babylon, understands something most civilizations forget: fear is more powerful than chains. And shame, when woven into law, lasts longer than scars. Still, in the quiet corners of the city, slaves dream of open roads, of families remembered, of a world where a name is not bought. But the city is vast, and the walls are high, and Babylon never forgets who belongs asterisk to whom. As the sun begins to fall behind the jagged stair-step silhouette of Babylon's ziggurats, the streets begin to stir in a different rhythm. The marketplace closes, the scribes pack away their styluses, and a strange transformation occurs. The city becomes gilded with torches, garlands, and ceremonial scent. It is the first night of the festival, perhaps the Akichu, the New Year feast, or the celebration of a god's return. And Babylon, once stern with law and omens, suddenly blooms with theater, wine, and joy. But don't be fooled, because under every cup of spiced beer and every smiling mask, there is dread. The feast begins with grandeur. Trumpets call from rooftops, echoing through the courtyards. Dancers painted in vermilion leap through the avenues like fire. Temple priests parade sacred statues through the city streets on golden carts, pulled by oxen clad in blue and gold fabric. Children toss flowers. Women sing hymns that spiral into the darkening sky. Offerings pile up in every shrine: dates, flatbreads, fattened birds, and oil so costly they could pay a scribe's salary for a year. It is, to the outsider, paradise. But Babylon does not celebrate without reason. These feasts are not mere parties. They are rituals of protection. You see, to the Babylonians, the turning of seasons was not guaranteed. Each year was a cycle of chaos narrowly avoided. The gods might continue to bless the city, or they might abandon it. Every festival was an attempt to remind the divine of your devotion. Each song, each sacrifice was a plea. Asterisk, stay with us. Do not forget us. Do not destroy us. Asterisk. And so the merriment takes on an edge of desperation. During the Akichu festival, the king is stripped of all regalia and slapped hard by the high priest. He must weep. Must. Because his tears symbolize Babylon's humility before the gods. If he does not cry, the gods may see pride, and pride leads to ruin. Thousands of eyes watch for the tear. They hold their breath until it falls. Then there is the mock king. In a shadow ritual few dare speak of aloud, a condemned criminal is sometimes dressed in royal robes, paraded as a substitute king. For a few days, he is given luxuries, fine food, and treated like royalty. But when the stars align, and the priests say the time has come, he is quietly taken away, executed, to absorb the city's sins. He dies so the real king may live. The people cheer the festival, but in the corners of their joy, they know someone always pays. Even the food has layers. At the festival table, you are served lamb because it's an animal of sacrifice. You are given bread shaped like temples, because to eat is to participate in worship. You drink date wine because dates are sacred to Ishtar, and inebriation brings you closer to her realm. The feast is a form of spellcasting, a kind of edible prayer. To eat is to anchor the gods to the earth a little longer. Yet the city's laughter sounds louder than usual, not because it is happier, but because it is trying to drown something out. For just outside the city walls, there are whispers. The Elamites are mustering soldiers. A plague has broken out in Borsippa. The river has shifted slightly too slightly. All are signs. All are reasons to fear. But tonight, the fear wears perfume. It sings. It dances. It laughs too loudly and drinks too quickly. Because to stop moving would be to let the dread catch up. So you move. You raise your cup with trembling hands. You kiss the idol's feet. You look up at the stars and pray they remain exactly where they are. In Babylon, a feast is never just a feast. It is a shield made of music and fire. It is a wall of joy built against the creeping dark. The most dangerous thing in Babylon was not a sword, nor a priest, nor even a god. It was a misstep, a moment of ignorance, a word out of place, a gesture made at the wrong time. In this city of order and omen, law was not a shield. It was a net, and it waited silently until you tripped. Babylonian law was etched into clay, preserved in codes like those of Hammurabi, not as philosophical ideals, but as rigid commands from above. An eye for an eye, the famous line reads, but that was only the beginning. For every situation, every relationship, every insult or injury, there was a precise response. The law was not concerned with fairness. It demanded balance. If you tipped the scale, no matter how lightly, the punishment would tip back harder, colder, and sometimes final. Let's say you borrow an ox from your neighbor. It dies in the night, perhaps from sickness. No foul play, no negligence. Still, the code states, if you did not sign a formal agreement, you must repay the loss in full. You protest. The neighbor says there was a witness. The court listens to the gods, not your explanation. They cast lots. They consult omens. You are found guilty. Your field is taken. Your son sold. Not because of intent, but because of structure. Or maybe you strike a man during an argument. Not a fatal blow. A bruise, a broken nose. But he is of a higher class, maybe a merchant, maybe a priest. The code says your hand must be cut off. No hearing. No chance for apology. You did not harm a man. You harmed a rank, and rank was sacred. Some crimes were so buried in belief that you would not even know you'd committed them. Step into the temple wearing the wrong color robe? That's sacrilege. Forget to recite the protection chant before a lunar eclipse. You've offended the gods. Call your child by the wrong ceremonial name? You've invited demons. These were not eccentric customs. These were risks. And the penalties could be more terrifying than death. There were crimes that required public penance, being paraded naked through the streets, whipped with reeds soaked in salt water. There were punishments that demanded silence, being locked in a clay room beneath the temple for days, until the gods sent a dream to the priests declaring your fate. And then there were the chillingly poetic ones. If you accused someone falsely of a crime and were found guilty of lying, you would receive the punishment you wished upon them. Lie about theft, you're dismembered. Lie about adultery, you're thrown into the river, bound. Babylon believed. That truth was not just spoken, was divined. A river ordeal, for instance, might determine your innocence. Bound hand and foot, you would be cast into the Euphrates. If you drowned, you were guilty. If you survived, gasping, half-dead, covered in silt, the gods had spoken. You were innocent, but your lungs paid the price of justice. Even the act of writing could ensnare you. Scribes, trained from childhood, were held to impossible standards. Misrecord a contract? It's fraud. Mistranslate a prophecy? It's sacrilege. Forget to record a tax transaction? You could lose your writing hand. In Babylon, knowledge was a privilege. Misusing it was a sin. And amid all this, the lines blurred. Was it a legal error or a religious crime? Did you break a law or offend? God, the answer didn't matter. The punishment would still come. So you live cautiously, You speak carefully. You record everything. You bow before judges, gods, and older men. You avoid shadows at noon and dreams that linger too long. Because here in Babylon, justice is not blind. It watches from every corner, listens through every wall, and it does not forgive ignorance. One day, perhaps, you'll wake to find yourself in a courtroom, standing before a clay tablet inscribed with your fate. And you'll ask, trembling, "What crime have I committed?" And the scribe will not answer. He will simply write your name. Night in Babylon doesn't bring silence. It brings something else, something older than the city's bricks, and far more watchful. When the markets close and the priests extinguish the temple flames, when even the scribes tuck away their styluses, Babylon doesn't sleep. It waits. From your modest clay house, its roof open to the stars, you lie down on your reed mat. You've worked the fields all day, or copied contracts in the shade, or watched your children chase a goat through a courtyard of dust. Your bones ache, your eyelids hang heavy. And yet, before you close your eyes, you murmur something. A small prayer, not to the great gods of sky or sun, but to the ones in the cracks, the gods who watch, because here in Babylon, sleep is not a break from reality. It's a crossing into another layer of it, that dreams are not your own. The Babylonians knew this with chilling certainty. Each dream is a message, a warning, a judgment, sometimes even a sentence. The gods send symbols, signs, and riddles wrapped in your sleep, and the wrong kind of dream can ruin your life. That is why, in the temple district, there are professional dream interpreters, Baru priests, who record your visions on tablets and cross-reference them with ancient omen lists. If you dream of a snake in your bed, or your teeth falling out, or water that runs uphill, it is recorded, it is analyzed, and the results can change everything. You may be told to avoid travel for a week. You may be ordered to make an offering of 3 sheep. Or worse, you may be declared cursed, possessed, a danger to the city's harmony. And so, as you sleep, your dreams are not private. They are watched, measured, sometimes by priests, sometimes by spirits, because Babylon is full of them. They live in dark corners, under the eaves of houses, in the folds of a dying man's last breath. The Edemu, the restless dead. The Udiku, spirits of violence and madness. Even the Lamassu, winged guardians carved in alabaster, watching from doorways with serene, lion-like eyes. They do not blink. They do not rest. They are always present, and they are always listening. If you wake up in the night gasping from a nightmare, your mat soaked in sweat, you do not speak aloud. You do not curse the gods. You do not move too quickly. You light a small lamp. You whisper a protection spell. You pour a few drops of oil on the floor and watch how it spreads. Because everything means something, even your silence. And if you sleep too soundly, without dreams, without movement, you may still be in danger. For Babylon believes that even dreamlessness can be a curse, a sign that the gods have turned their backs. That something is lurking in the unseen. So the city is built with talismans, clay dogs buried under thresholds, figurines placed under pillows, inscriptions scratched onto bedroom walls. Some families place dried fish beside their children's beds to ward off the Lilu, the night demons. Others burn cedar wood to keep the dead from entering. Even the stars above your rooftop bed aren't free from suspicion. A comet may streak by, a planet may shift in the wrong direction, and the priests will know. They'll read the heavens and declare the city unclean, or ripe for conquest, or on the verge of pestilence. And suddenly, your dream isn't just a dream, it's a national emergency. So as you drift off in Babylon, know this: you are not alone. The gods are watching. The dead are listening. *, and the city itself, its bricks, its towers, its sacred canals is breathing with secrets too old to name. Asterisk. Night in Babylon doesn't bring silence. It brings something else, something older than the city's bricks, and far more watchful. When the markets close and the priests extinguish the temple flames, when even the scribes tuck away there, it waits. From your modest clay house, its roof open to the stars, you lie down on your reed mat. You've worked the fields all day, or copied contracts in the shade, or watched your children chase a goat through a courtyard of dust. Your bones ache, your eyelids hang heavy, and yet, before you close your eyes, you murmur something. A small prayer, not to the great gods of sky or sun, but to the ones in the cracks, the gods who watch. Because here in Babylon, sleep is not a break from reality. It's a crossing into another layer of it. Dreams are not your own. The Babylonians knew this with chilling certainty. Each dream is a message, a warning, a judgment, sometimes even a sentence. The gods send symbols, signs, and riddles wrapped in your sleep, and the wrong kind of dream can ruin your life. That is why, in the temple district, there are professional dream interpreters, Laro priests, who record your visions on tablets and cross-reference them with ancient omen lists. If you dream of a snake in your bed, or your teeth falling out, or water that runs uphill, it is recorded, it is analyzed, and the results can change everything. You may be told to avoid travel for a week. You may be ordered to make an offering of 3 sheep, or worse, you may be declared cursed, possessed, a danger to the city's harmony. And so, as you sleep, your dreams are not private. They are watched, measured, sometimes by priests, sometimes by spirits, because Babylon is full of them. They live in dark corners, under the eaves of houses, in the folds of a dying man's last breath. The Edemu, the restless dead. The Udiku, spirits of violence and madness. Even the Lamasu, winged guardians carved in alabaster, watching from doorways with serene, lion-like eyes. They do not blink. They do not rest. They are always present, and they are always listening. If you wake up in the night gasping from a nightmare, your mat soaked in sweat, you do not speak aloud. You do not curse the gods. You do not move too quickly. You light a small lamp. You whisper a protection spell. You pour a few drops of oil on the floor and watch how it spreads. Because everything means something, even your silence. And if you sleep too soundly, without dreams, without movement, you may still be in danger. For Babylon believes that even dreamlessness can be a curse, a sign that the gods have turned their backs. That something is lurking in the unseen. So the city is built with talismans, clay dogs buried under thresholds, figurines placed under pillows, inscriptions scratched onto bedroom walls. Some families place dried fish beside their children's beds to ward off the Lilu, the night demons. Others burn cedar wood to keep the dead from entering. Even the stars above your rooftop bed aren't free from suspicion. A comet may streak by. A planet may shift in the wrong direction, and the priests will know. They'll read the heavens and declare the city unclean, or ripe for conquest, or on the verge of pestilence. And suddenly, your dream isn't just a dream, it's a national emergency. So as you drift off in Babylon, know this, you are not alone. The gods are watching, the dead are listening, and the city itself, its bricks, its towers, its sacred canals is breathing with secrets too old to name. Sleep lightly, for here, even in your deepest rest, you are never unseen. Beneath Babylon's shimmering temples and sun-baked roads lies something most never speak of, the foundation rituals. You see, this city wasn't just built with bricks and mortar. It was built with fear, and sometimes with blood. When a new building was erected in Babylon, whether a palace, a shrine, or a granary, It wasn't enough to simply lay stone upon stone. That would be reckless. Empty walls attract empty spirits. The Babylonians believed that every structure needed a soul, a guardian, a watcher, a tether to the divine realm. And to bind that soul, a dark tradition was followed. Foundation sacrifices. Sometimes, it was symbolic small clay figurines buried under the threshold. You might find a crouching dog figurine under your doorway, or a terracotta demon trapped in a jar, face contorted in a scream. Their presence was meant to trap evil, to confuse wandering ghosts. But not all sacrifices were symbolic. Some were horrifyingly real. Whispers, half erased by time, speak of humans often slaves or condemned criminals, buried alive beneath walls or pillars. Not as punishment, but as protection. Their life force was believed to serve the building, to make it last longer, to satisfy the gods of the earth who might otherwise grow jealous. To walk through Babylon was to walk over hundreds of forgotten bodies, nameless souls sealed into the city's bones. And the rituals didn't stop there. Before the laying of a major foundation, say, the massive Etemenanki ziggurat or the temple of Marduk, the priests would consult omens, slaughter animals, read the shape of their livers, watch the pattern of smoke in the wind. If anything seemed off, if the sheep's lungs were spotted or the breeze came from the north, they would delay the construction. Or worse, they would double the offering. 2 goats, 3 prisoners, a child. They feared the curse of imbalance. A temple built without proper rituals might collapse, or worse, it might attract Lamu, the shadow demons who fed on unfinished things. And so, every crack in a wall, every creak in the night, was watched with dread. Was it poor craftsmanship? Or was the sacrifice not enough? Even centuries later, archaeologists have found foundation deposits bowls filled with bones, small inscriptions hidden deep in the base of walls, talismans meant to hold in the rage of the underworld. They tell us what the Babylonians never admitted aloud, that their civilization was haunted not just by gods and kings, but by the very buildings they slept in. Homes could curse you. Walls could listen. A mislaid brick was not a construction flaw. It was a spiritual failure. And so the masons of Babylon worked with trembling care. They sang hymns as they laid bricks. They burned incense as they sealed thresholds. They whispered the names of protective spirits into the mortar. And if they felt a chill in the earth, a presence they could not name, they buried it deeper, covered it in lime, prayed it would not rise again. You think of cities as places to live. Babylon thought of cities as places to contain, to lock away old gods, old anger, and things far too ancient to name. Even now, if you walk its ruins, you may feel it, a pulse beneath your feet, the whisper of something buried that was never meant to be found. Because some foundations don't support a building, they hold something down. Asterisk. Imagine you're standing on a rooftop in Babylon, the summer wind licking the Euphrates into ripples, the city below humming with life. The copper bells of a temple echo faintly. Merchants laugh in the alleys. Children chase shadows. And then, without warning, the sun begins to vanish. At first, you think it's a cloud, but the priests are already running. Women grab their children. A silence falls so heavy, it seems to push the air from your lungs. You look up again, and the sun is turning black. The shadows shift. The color drains from the world. And you begin to scream, because this is not a natural event, not a coincidence, not a mere alignment of planets. No. In Babylon, a solar eclipse is nothing less than a message from the gods, a dark, burning verdict written across the heavens. And it rarely ends well for the king. You see, the Babylonians were obsessed with omens, not just dreams or liver readings, but cosmic signs. The movement of stars, the color of moonlight, the behavior of birds. But nothing Nothing was more fearsome than an eclipse. The great darkness of day, the vanishing of the divine sun. To them, this meant one thing: the gods were furious, specifically with the king. And so, Babylon had a bizarre, almost theatrical solution. If the priests predicted an eclipse or worse, or caught off guard by one, they would immediately begin a ritual known as substitute kingship. The reigning king, no matter how powerful, no matter how beloved, was declared spiritually doomed. And so they found a substitute, a commoner, a prisoner, a mentally ill man, sometimes even a gardener plucked from the royal palace. He would be bathed, dressed in regal robes, seated on a mock throne. For a few days, sometimes weeks, he would be treated like a king, fed royal meals, attended by servants, called my lord. But all of it was a trap, because this fake king was not being honored. He was being offered sacrifice. When the eclipse passed, when the sun returned and the omen faded, substitute would be executed, sometimes quietly, sometimes ritually, buried far from the city, his name erased. The real king would then return to power, his sins transferred, his destiny cleansed. And the gods, it was hoped, would be appeased. You might think this was rare. It wasn't. There are tablets, carefully preserved, that document dozens of these rituals. Lists of eclipse warnings, names of substitutes, notes from astrologers pleading with the king to delay war or stop a marriage because of an upcoming solar alignment. Babylonian kings didn't just rule with armies or gold. They ruled in fear of the sky. And what of the people? The commoners? They watched with trembling hearts as the sun darkened, as the priests burned incense and shouted prayers from rooftops. Mothers wept. Old men collapsed. Every eclipse, to them, was a gamble. The gods' fury might demand more than a king. Disease, famine, earthquakes, war. And when it passed, there was no celebration. Only the tight, unspeaking relief of survivors. As if they had walked through fire and come out singed but standing. It makes you wonder how fragile was their world. If a shadow in the sky could threaten to collapse it. But perhaps it wasn't fragility. Perhaps it was respect. For the Babylonians did something we've long forgotten. They listened to the sky. They studied it, feared it, worshipped it. Every star, every planet, every eclipse was a god's breath upon the world. A sign, a sentence, a scream. And so, on that rooftop in ancient Babylon, as the sunlight fades and the air turns cold, you don't ask what's happening. You ask, asterisk, who must die, so the sun may return? Asterisk, deep within the temples of Babylon, behind walls that smelled of dust and centuries, lay rooms most citizens never saw. They weren't filled with gold, or idols, or instruments of sacrifice. No, the priests guarded something more dangerous. Asterisk, words. Asterisk, asterisk, thousands upon thousands of words, carved into clay tablets, stacked in niches, sealed in jars, wrapped in linen, and guarded by curses. This was the temple library, the bit mummy, the house of secrets, a place not of learning alone, but of power, real power, frightening power. Because in Babylon, knowledge wasn't neutral, it was magical, and not everyone was allowed to touch it. Only the highest class of scribes, men trained since childhood, who had memorized thousands of cuneiform signs, could read these texts. And even they feared them. Some tablets were wrapped in red thread to warn readers. Others had warnings carved directly into them. Whoever breaks this seal, may the gods erase your name. Not metaphor, not poetry, a real threat. The Babylonians believed that certain words, if spoken by the wrong tongue, could kill. There were tablets of spells. How to summon storms, how to cause miscarriages, how to call a god from the underworld and trap it in a vessel. There were rituals for kings, for omens, for the purification of corpses, for the cleansing of possessed infants. Instructions on how to build altars to spirits with no faces. Diagnosis of diseases caused not by bacteria, but by demons that entered through dreams, and worse. There were tablets that shouldn't have survived. The kinds archaeologists later found buried in burnt layers, scorched but legible. Tablets describing forbidden rituals to reverse fate, to curse a city, to kill a king without touching him. Ancient protocols for manufacturing, not just curses, but false omens. A way to fool even the gods. You begin to understand Babylon didn't just build temples and ziggurats. It built a vault of supernatural control, a database of everything mankind feared and how to weaponize it. But here's the most chilling part. These texts weren't just for defense or knowledge. They were used. We know this because the margins are filled with notes, corrections, additions. A priest somewhere, centuries ago, tested the spell, tweaked the words, tried again. And sometimes it worked out. So imagine, as a Babylonian, you fall sick. You don't call a doctor. You go to a priest. He consults a tablet, finds your symptoms in clay. He reads the diagnosis. Not flu, not fever, but a ghost, angry with your grandfather's unfulfilled vow. To heal you, he performs a ritual, burns fish bones, recites a 7-line incantation, buries a figurine under your bed. And if it doesn't work, he goes deeper into the library, to the shelves that are chained shut, to the words that should not be spoken twice. In Babylon, knowledge was not public. It was sacred and dangerous. The city's power came not only from gods and kings, but from those who could read the invisible, those who could command the dead through syllables alone. And perhaps this is why Babylon's fall was so complete. When the city was invaded, the libraries were looted, the tablets shattered or taken, the priests killed, and with them, the memory of how to survive in that world. Not just a loss of books, but a loss of control over forces they barely understood. The House of Secrets became a tomb, and the words once carved in clay words that could command gods, demons, fate itself were swallowed by time. But sometimes, when archaeologists open a sealed jar in the ruins of a temple, they still find a fragment, a name, a curse, a word the world was not meant to speak again. Asterisk. In the heart of Babylon, behind the towering ziggurats and crowded bazaars, there stood a place few dared approach. After dark, a building with no grand entrance, no carved reliefs, no signs. But everyone knew what it was. They called it the Bit. Mexi, the house of the exorcists. Here lived the Zapu men trained from boyhood, not in war or kingship, but in the invisible. They weren't sorcerers, not quite priests. They were something older, something colder. They were the last line of defense between humans and the other side. Asterisk. And make no mistake, Babylon believed the other side was very real. The dead were not silent. The sick were not merely ill. Every misfortune had a name, a shape, a hunger behind it. A curse could pass through generations. A misstep in ritual could awaken something. And when that happened, the only ones who could intervene were the exorcists. Their tools, not weapons, not fire, but words spoken in perfect cadence, in a language so old it was already dying, accompanied by strange herbs, carved amulets, goat hair, ashes, and sometimes human fingernails. They would recite incantations for hours, days, sleep-deprived, fasting, bathed in special water. The wrong tone, the wrong breath, and the spirit might stay. The clay tablets they used are among the most terrifying documents ever recovered. Some are simple. If a man's dreams are filled with snakes, his spirit is upon him. Others are deeply specific. If a woman's left ear bleeds when she walks near garlic, The daughter of Ereshkigal has entered her. Still others are filled with ancient fear. Instructions for banishing Utuku, the violent dead, or Edimu, the vengeful, breathless ones who possessed the living. And these exorcists didn't work in secret. They were summoned into homes, into palaces, into temples where even the priests were afraid. If the king had nightmares, the exorcist came. If crops withered, if babies died too young, if walls cracked for no reason, the Zapu were sent in. And when they entered, neighbors closed windows. Children stopped speaking, because everyone knew. If they were called, something was already wrong. These men didn't just banish spirits, they negotiated with them. They threatened them in the name of gods, offering blood or silence, or offerings to be delivered in the underworld. And when the rituals ended, the exorcist would leave slowly, backwards, never turning his back on the house until he was sure whatever it was had gone. But sometimes, it did in single quotes T. Sometimes, the exorcists were found days later, shaking, whispering to themselves, fingers covered in their own blood. Sometimes they disappeared. And sometimes on rare, buried tablets, there are records of failure. A note scratched hurriedly into clay. Spirit not banished. Ward broken. Awaiting eclipse. Even they, the most powerful spiritual protectors in Babylon, feared what waited in the cracks between the living and the dead. So when you imagine Babylon, its walls, its rituals, its kings remember this. There were houses that never held families, rooms that echoed without footsteps, and men who spoke to the shadows. So you wouldn't have to dot. So could you survive a day in ancient Babylon? Not likely. Not because you're weak, not because you're soft, but because Babylon didn't care about survival. It cared about order, balance, power, and in that pursuit, it would break even its most loyal children, just to prove that its God still reigned above. You would struggle to breathe in its dust-thick air, choked with incense and canal rot. You would falter under its laws older than empires, but colder than justice. You'd likely misstep, speak out of turn, offend a priest, miscount a measure of grain, sleep through a ritual you didn't know existed. And by the time you understood your mistake, it wouldn't be a lecture you received. It would be a sentence. Even if you were lucky, if you weren't born a slave, or accused falsely, or caught in the gears of its omens, you would still live every hour under the weight of unseen eyes. From the moment you rise to your knees on a reed mat to the moment you fall asleep under painted constellations, Babylon watches. Not just the city, but the spirits, the gods, the systems. You breathe wrong, you might invite a curse. You forget a name, you might awaken a demon. You dream of water flowing backward, and you might wake up exiled, alone or worse. And yet, Babylon was not a place of mindless cruelty. It was brilliant, ambitious. Its mathematics predicted eclipses. Its engineers rerouted rivers. Its temples scraped the stars. This was a civilization that believed in its own divinity. Its place in the cosmos was not questioned, but enforced. Its fearsome order was, in its eyes, a sacred mirror of the heavens. But that order came at a cost. Behind the beauty of blue-glazed walls and towering ziggurats was a silence born of voices erased, crimes unspoken, rituals that stitched terror into daily life. The city was not loud with chaos, it was quiet with control. And in that silence, your individuality, your doubt, your small human tremors would not be forgiven. You wouldn't last a day, not because Babylon would kill you, but because it would reshape you. You'd forget the sound of your own voice. You'd learn to smile while watching someone whipped in the marketplace. You'd learn to sleep with your prayers clutched like a shield beneath your head. You'd survive. Only if you stopped being yourself. And perhaps That is the greatest danger of all, because in Babylon, you wouldn't just lose your freedom. You'd lose your soul. Now, close your eyes. Let the heat of ancient Babylon fade from your skin. Let the whisper of its laws, its omens, its buried spirits slip into the quiet. You've walked through markets, echoing with ancient debt. You've breathed incense in temples, lined with fear. You've seen kings fall to shadows, and ghosts buried beneath bricks. You felt the weight of a city that didn't just live, it believed. And if you listen closely, just beyond the edge of sleep, you might still hear it. The low chant of a priest.